Well, all preachers, I think, must struggle figuring out what to say in about 10 minutes on Easter Sunday. We could tell you the meta-narrative of the resurrection, how the cross and the tomb stand at the center of our story because they represent the end of one way of life and the advent of an entirely new way of being human. We walk through the painful drama of Holy Week, of violence, execution, and exclusion, so that by the time we get to this day, we will more fully know how Easter counters, subsumes, and transforms the liturgy of fear into one of hope. Or we could just ask the question, what in the world does resurrection matter to us as more than a confession of the church? John's gospel, which you heard this morning in the Proclamation, tells the narrative of resurrection as a personal story. Other gospels tell it differently, but in John, it is a very human story, not a theological confession. In this story, the details make the story relatable. There's a garden, a large stone. The cloths are made of linen. Women are weeping. The details that make the story come alive are accounted for. What we observe, what we see as readers is important. And all through the Gospel of John, seeing has been important. In fact, the very first words Jesus speaks in the book are, "What are you looking for?" Or, "What do you wish to see?" And now the question is bookended by Mary's resurrection proclamation. "I have seen the Lord." What we see, or what we are willing to see, determines so much about how we move through the world. So I wonder this morning how you have seen the resurrection story. As a confession of the institutional church, as a fully human story, maybe. The first-person witness of a woman weeping at the tomb. Or are you trying to make sense of the koan, the paradox? What John's gospel asks of us is not to interrogate the resurrection of Jesus, but draws our attention to Mary as she makes an assertion of her experience. She tells us that for Jesus to be raised from the dead is also an assertion about her own resurrection, which is what the story wants to be for us, a mirror to our own resurrection. Too often, we, or at least I, confuse resurrection with transformation. But I notice that there is this interval between God's work in raising Jesus and the time when it finally makes a difference for Mary. Resurrection is a process. It's not an event. And in John's telling, this is as much the resurrection of Mary as it is Jesus. And this process hasn't just begun for her. Long ago, Jesus released her from 7 demons. You remember that story? 1 for every day of the week. Mary has been learning how to come back to herself ever since. She arrives at the tomb in the dark. Her sight is gradual, as recognition and belief have been in John's gospel. She begins by seeing dimly, touching only half the story and writing a narrative of her own. She doesn't go into the tomb. She doesn't see that the body is gone. She does see the stone removed from the entrance, and she makes up a story about what must have happened, what is logical, what makes sense. She mistakes Jesus for the gardener when he appears beside her, not recognizing the truth that is close enough to touch. But when she hears her name, when she hears the truth of who she is spoken over her, that makes all the difference. It's like we have been learning here at First Congregational during Lent that to see, you must be seen. Past the condition of your biography and all the way to your identity. And only now, 29 verses later, at least a day, does the death and resurrection of Jesus make a difference for Mary. She proclaims what she has seen, the risen Lord. It's a personal story, a personal affirmation, not doctrine, not confession. It is her story. Mary is meant to turn us around toward ourselves, to remember that the business of resurrection is not just church doctrine, but for us too. She is both in the process of seeing, and she is seen at one and the same time. This is true for us too. The koan about dying and being born anew or losing your life in order to find it means that we both are and are in the process of becoming. Resurrection is not synonymous with a transformation moment. It is lifelong work. Recognizing your name, being unbound, becoming who you are. The author and priest Barbara Brown Taylor reminds us that we do not have to die in order to discover the truth of this teaching. We only need to lose track of who we are or who we thought we were supposed to be, so that we end up lying flat on the dirt floor basement of our hearts. Do this, Jesus says, and you will live up to the incarnation. You will discover what it means to be fully human. The Easter story gives us Mary to hold on to. It gives us something to carry around when all the cards are stacked against us, to remind us that there is hope to hold on to. That fear and death will not, in this story, have the final word. We will likely continue to encounter stones that seal us off from life and cloth that binds our resurrection. But as you and I roll away stones and unravel our grave cloths, we are continually learning what it means to be free, what it means to remember who we are. "500 snow geese land on a pond in Butte, Montana. They're typical migrating geese in late fall, but the pond isn't just a pond. The pond is a Superfund site. It's filled with heavy metals from a copper mine. It's, in fact, red. It is so full of copper. If the pond ever spills its banks or soaks up too far into the soil, it will poison the aquifer. The town will be gone. It will become a ghost town. So the townsfolk see that these geese have landed on the pond, and they try to scare them away, but the geese are tired. And the pond is large enough that they can just swim further into the middle. And so they head out And they drink and they bathe in the red water of the poisonous pond. And as you can imagine, their painful death starts to begin. The honking, the sound is deafening, as the water is eating through the esophagus of the geese. And they all die within a few hours. And now the people have to clean up 500 snow geese in a toxic pond. And they can't. They can't touch them. They can't get into the water. And so the Montana winter became spring and then summer. And someone noticed that there was something growing on the pond, a black scum. People were concerned because nothing ever grew in the red pond. And they got some of it and they took it to the scientists that had been working with the town and with this Superfund site, and the EPA had already made their best efforts to clean up the water. But the best they could do, the very best the scientists and the research could do, was clean about 20% of the heavy metals from the water. And they tested this scum, and they asked where it came from. And the people told them, and the scientists said that's not possible. Between 85 to 95% of the heavy metals were gone. They said it was almost close enough to drinking water. It was a particular strain of bacteria that was sponging up the metal. And they found that this bacteria only exists in the gastrointestinal tract of the snow goose. Hear the invitation this Easter morning, beloved ones. I don't know what needs resurrection in you, but I know that the God of the resurrection says, even in the valley of the shadow of death, even when it does not seem possible, new life is at work. There is nothing in you not worthy of resurrection, nothing God cannot bring to life. This is a call to come home, back to yourselves, to your worthiness, your enoughness, you who have been seen, who have been known, and who are called beloved. Amen.